We're very proud to present Eric Amodio here to talk about GitLens. But Eric, why don't you go ahead and give us a quick introduction to yourself?
Hi, everyone. So I'm Eric Amodio. I've done software development for a long time. Just been, interested in it since I was a kid. Just the whole idea of creation, and that's sort of, software development has just been my passion. And then, later been getting onto creating dev tools for developers to create better, better software. So that's been something that's been driving me for a long time now.
Right on. Where are you located in the world?
I'm in Massachusetts, the east coast of the U.S. Just about an hour outside of Boston. So it's actually quite beautiful today.
Great. When I interview someone, I'm always interested to learn, how did you first encounter Git? What's your origin story with getting into version control?
Yeah, so it's a long time ago now. The company I was at, I was joining, and there were a small team building sort of like WYSIWYG app for web development, and specifically in the marketing landscape. And I was coming in. It's like I had always used source control before. From the source safe to SVN and Borland's tools. But then when I was coming on, they hadn't been really using source control. They were a really small team, and they were just sharing files and other things. It was crazy. So it's like, when I'm joining, I'm like, oh, you've got source control and you got this stuff. And so they kind of like scrambled to get source control in before I started, which was funny. But then like soon after that time, we were just getting started. I was having trouble getting everyone going on SVN, and Git was coming out, and some of all the distributed ones, were becoming popular. So looking at those, Mercurial and Bazaar and a bunch of these other ones. But Git started becoming the de facto leader, and just because it became the open source seemed to pick that more. And so I was also very interested in that ecosystem. So decided it's like, okay, we wanted to start contributing to other projects. We were using projects, so let's see if we can switch over to Git, see if that would help. And it was a great choice ultimately. Git also has a high learning curve. It's UX is not the best, to put it nicely, but it's an extremely powerful tool, and it's very versatile. So it served well, but it also created this need of wanting to use more tools than just the command line for my team, and just try to tools that we can bring in. So started with, I think it was Source Tree, or actually it was one other before that, was one of the tools that we started with. And then later on we saw the Git tools in VSCode, and sort of bringing that into the IDE was really cool. And I had written extensions for Visual Studio, the Big Brother product, and try to get Git, and Tortoise Git was my choice, because that was a nice intermix of command line and GUI. So definitely it was really interesting of getting into that. And just I'm not exactly sure where I sort of first saw Git, but with its popularity there was
we're here primarily to talk about GitLens, but you mentioned it there. You ran into VS Code. Obviously, you're a fan of it. So yeah, what's your origin story with that? Like, do you remember how you stumbled upon that?
Yeah, so I mean, so I came from doing a lot of, my original roots were, I did C in assembly and stuff in school and that sort of stuff. And I never honestly really liked programming that much. It felt just, I wasn't getting what I really liked out of it. And then I got introduced in Visual Basic. And I just loved the whole creation aspect. It's just I could just bring things to life so quickly and just create, just take the ideas in your head and bring them out. And so from Visual Basic, then I moved into .NET and did that. But these IDEs were getting heavier and bigger, and Visual Studio at that time was, to put it frankly, a pig. And so looking for other things, and I was using tools like Sublime Text and others, just to be more lightweight editors to edit a lot of web stuff, just because to load up Visual Studio for that would take so long. It was just, so much of a beast and overkill for a lot of the development I was doing at the time. And then, when VSCode came out, it was like, this is just beautiful. I mean, it just sort of, I don't know exactly why I just gravitated to it, like from the minute I saw it. But I mean, I think part of it is too that it was, it was this web app. I was already really involved in the web stuff. And so it was like, you can open up dev tools and just tweak and stuff inside it. And I remember, I was using a Mac a lot at that point in time. And, Visual Studio Code just came out for the Mac and everything else. And there were some issues with some file sharing or some other things that I was doing, and actually was able to debug the issue by just using the dev tools and web tools, and sent an email off to the team with this little patch of like, this is what you can do to fix it, because this was actually before they were open source. And literally the next day it showed up in the VS Code build.
Wow.
And I was like, this is awesome.
That's a great community story. I really like that.
It was just, just the whole thing of, being active to the community. And then, soon after, it was pretty soon after that, they, became open source. And then there was the whole extension model. And, so like for me, just like the extension model, I think was the biggest interest for me, because, I was trying to get TypeScript, at my job, I was writing lots and lots of JavaScript. We were maintaining an enormous, like 150,000 line JavaScript app. And it was just really hard to keep making changes to such a big app, because it's really hard to reason about. And I really wanted to bring TypeScript in, and, the new projects we were bringing on, I wanted to use that. So I wanted to play with that language. I really liked the idea of these gradual types, and, to like basically meet you where you are when you want it. So I really liked that a lot. And so being able to do that with this extension model is sort of like, oh, I get to play in the editor I really like. I get to play in the language I'm really excited about now. So like, what can I do in that space? And, what sort of sparked the whole, idea for GitLens was just, Git's hard. It was hard for my team at that time. So I was like, can I do something that makes some aspects of Git a little bit easier? But I think, so that was in the back of my mind. But the forefront was that Visual Studio, the big product, had these little like code lens is what they're called, the little annotations that were above the code that said like who authored it and that sort of thing. That's like, oh, that's really cool. Like I'm, to see who was authored and when. So it's like, can I do the same thing in VS Code? And because VS Code has this code lens API, maybe I can play with that. So that was my first thing. It's just like, can I do that? So it's like, okay, how can I get this information from Git? How do I shell out to Git? So it's just all this, just learning to play with Node, play with these, TypeScript, play with these models, play with Git, learn how to, manipulate Git to get the data that I wanted out of it. So it was, just a whole lot of fun and exploration.
Right on, man. So that beautiful segue into, well, what you created, GitLens. Maybe for folks that are new, I know GitKon has a lot of attendees who are beginners, a lot of students out there who might not have encountered your project quite yet. Could you just give us a quick high level, like how would you describe this as someone that's brand new to Git?
Yeah, so GitLens, basically as its little tagline is it supercharges the Git inside of VS Code. So VS Code has its own Git provider built in and supports, seeing your changes and committing and a bunch of aspects of Git, creating branches, seeing what branch you're on, switching branches, that sort of stuff. But it doesn't really go beyond the individual mechanics of just like creating a commit and staging your file. So it's really just about your editing experience, getting it committed, and that's largely it. And so I really wanted to bring something that sort of takes a bigger picture of that. So I started from these sort of like silly just toy project roots, but one of the things I wanted to really get to was something that I did a lot, even in the days of SourceSafe and others, is dig through commit histories of just, because like, I'd come onto a project or, join a new team, and it's like, well, why is this code like it is? And code comments hardly don't exist in our world. I mean, it's pretty rare that you have really good comments, but often you do have pretty decent commit messages. Mm-hmm. Now, that's not always true, but I find it's way more true than code comments. And so like you can walk back and you can see this historical record of how things got to be. And for me, like that's always been something as a developer I've always gravitated toward, because it's like, to me, that's how I understand code. It's like I can see sort of like what the system was for it, how it is now, but how it got to be there. Because if I'm going to make changes in that, if I'm not aware of like why things got to this point, I could easily cause more bugs and more issues by not taking advantage of that information that's locked up there. And so for me, it's like, that's kind of painful. You have to really work to get that information. So I really wanted to unlock the power that's inside this repository, all this useful information, and bring it up to the forefront so you don't have to work for that. So GitLens really makes it easy to really visualize your whole repository, walk and navigate seamlessly through history, and be able to track things down, whether it's the file level, at the line level, that sort of thing, to try to make it as easy to get through history and understand why things are the way they are or why they changed. So yeah, that's one of the main goals.
Right on. You've actually already partially answered one of my next questions.
Sorry.
Which is like, no, that's great. Like where the idea of GitLens came from. It says on your the GitLens website, it all started with a simple question: could I get insights via CodeLens to any document? I was curious if there's a specific backstory there. Was there like a specific project you were flustered on? Was there a particular like incident that you're like, okay, I've got to find a solution for this? Or
not really. I mean, it's just, I think it's, working, trying to get the historical record again on code. It's like, if I can see, I can open a file and I can see that this function was modified by my teammate yesterday, and then I can go and dive into that or ask them why this changed and that sort of thing. So, I mean, to me, it was more just like seeing how the file has changed, where things changed in it. Like, if this function, if I'm trying to debug something and, I'm like stepping through code and I can see this function hasn't changed in 2 years, well, maybe that's not the place where the problem is. It could be, but I mean, if I know this bug happened really recently, it gives me this more information to say, where this changed. Like, oh, this thing was changed yesterday. Well, maybe this is, where this is as I'm debugging through that chain. So just trying to do that. And the any document thing was, VSCode had this API where you can, through the language system, of LSP and just the language intelligence, you can basically ask and say, give me all the document symbols in this document. And so you'll get back this whole list of here's functions and here's these things. And they're sort of targets. And depending on the language, you can get a little bit more information. But this allowed me to say, okay, well, here's this function. So now I can know like these are all the functions, and I can put CodeLens at those points and figure out the range for those functions so that I can see these are the changes that happened in there. How many authors are in that range and that sort of stuff. So it provided this really nice way of doing that. And it was just, now language agnostic. Anytime some new LSP server would support, if you had support for a new language, GitLens would now just automatically light up and work with that because those things would now apply to that system. So it was really nice to not have to try to parse these files myself. I wanted to be really as agnostic to the underlying thing as I can and just, harness the power of Git.
Right on. Actually, I think you've already answered one of the next questions as well. But one of the other things you say on the site is you call it a feature-rich product with a mission of its own to simply help you better understand code. You've already expanded on that a little bit, like seeing code history, seeing how the thing got made, really building on what Git does. But I was hoping you could just speak to that just a little bit. Like, what's the the big problems you're hoping GitLens solves for a Git user?
Yeah, so I mean, I think, one of the things, is just being in the IDE, I think helps a lot. Like you don't have to context switch. Your context is based on where you're editing. The information is now contextually relevant. So if I'm like starting to edit a function, I have inline annotations where your mouse cursor is. And so I can know who changed that function last. I can see the diff of what that function was, what that line was just in the previous commit. If things have changed, I can see how long ago. So it's like if I'm editing that, I sort of get that right there. I don't have to work for it. It's largely unobtrusive. It stays in the background until you really want it, and it just makes it really easy to surface. So it's really just more about meeting you where you are when you want to. Like if you're editing code or if you're debugging code, there are valuable insights that you can get from that. And then from that, that's sort of, I think that's one of the most important aspects of GitLens is like really bringing that contextual to the code file that you're working on, editing or debugging. But then I wanted to build up sort of a richer client sort of around that so that we can bring, more insights to the whole repository. So being able to, really see your branches and dive into any branch and see the changes in there and being able to dive through that and, really see that in real time when those things are there, or see the commits that have come in, be able to compare commits. Because, one thing is often is we're working on, branches that are different from the branch you're going to merge into, or feature branches, that kind of thing. So having this sort of these real-time comparison views to say, okay, here's my changes in compared to what main currently has. And I can just look through that and see the diffs of the files, or, hey, I've got 30 commits on this feature branch, compare that to main, and now I can boil that down. I can dig into each of the changes of each commit, but I could also just boil that down and just, here's the set of files that have changed in that whole branch as compared to what the other branch has. And so I can really quickly review and check to see what has changed over time, what's different between those things. And then GitLens adds powerful tools to be able to compare across any 2 points, even for a file or from the repository, from the commits as well. And try to make that as seamless and meet you where you want to be on that. But then it sort of evolves into sort of the standard Git client stuff, the pieces just to round it out. But most recently, I really wanted to start tackling merges and conflicts. And I haven't done a whole lot on the conflict itself side. I mean, VSCode's conflict stuff is not bad. I think there's a lot more we can do there. But the actually doing rebases and merges and trying to do that, I wanted to bring that to be much easier. And then when you encounter a conflict during a merge or a rebase, to be able to quickly see the different sides of that. So like one thing I often try to do is when I'm in a merge conflict, it's like you get the little merge thing here, it doesn't give me enough context. So GitLens provides a little thing for each file, and you can say, here's the diff of the file before it got merged to its previous. So you can see this is the set of changes that this side's trying to get into the file, and here's the set of changes that you're trying to get into the file. So you can really clearly see what are the set of things that have changed, because sometimes like you'll get a commit, or a diff that's all this stuff changed, and you look at the side of what you're actually trying to get in or what the other side's trying to get in, and it's like a one-line change, but it caused so much conflicts because of where it was. And it's like, oh, well, now I can much more easily say, okay, I can pretty much accept everything on my side and just pull in the one line that I wanted and just try to make that easier. And then same from the rebase side of just, rebase is a powerful tool in Git. It's also hard to use. So try to make a visual tool where you can drag the commits around, reorder them, squash them, make that sort of much more accessible. So I've been wanting to spend more and more time on, making things, making these powerful tools more accessible, so that you can, utilize the power that's there in a much easier way.
Right on, man. Darn tootin', the interface of Git is not the most user-friendly in the world. And then, wow, so powerful, like things like rebase, and then you get into the terror of a merge conflict. That UI doesn't really help you at all. So thank you very much for helping us to figure this stuff out.
Definitely trying. I think there's still a lot more that can be done, but yeah.
What do you see as the future of GitLens? Like,
as I mentioned, you know, it's like one of the things is I want to do is to take the sort of Git's powerful tools and sort of make them more accessible. So like from the rebase, there's a lot more on that sort of merging and rebase that I want to do. I've got some stuff that helps you while you're inside the rebase, and I want to do more inside there of, you know, being able to like easier go through your steps and see what's happening so you can more easily reason about that. There's a lot more, I think, in just, in dealing with merge conflicts. There's, you know, whether it's just UI that you can sort of open up panels and have information just more readily accessible. I mean, right now GitLens has it, but it's sort of like in the tree view. So you're separate from where you're looking at your merge conflict to the tree. And there's, you know, a little bit of cognitive dissonance to try to connect the two. So I want to bring that sort of closer together so you can see those more inline contextually, you know, whether that looks at sort of AI sort of inferencing to try to, you know, improve the merge conflicts from the get-go. You know, if we can sort of do more before a conflict actually happens to reason about that, or to even just like suggest like, hey, there's a conflict, okay, that's fine, but here's what, you know, we think may be the best way to merge this, you know, by looking at the histories and trying to compare that. You know, so there's that side of things. You know, another thing that I haven't done much, but I've experimented with, is just try to bring more visualizations. So like, you know, just timelines of things. Like, you know, right now you can walk through history, or you can, you know, just like, you know, there's GitLens has just buttons where you can just like kind of like you're backing up through a browser history, you know, back. You can keep going back in a file and keep going back through the history of that and go forward to the history, which is nice and smooth. But you know, you don't know what you're getting into, like, you know, which commit is meaningful. You might go through 5 different commits that don't really have anything where you're looking for or what you're looking for. So trying to want to show it in a timeline, and even in the tree view, right, here's a list, but that doesn't necessarily give me enough information. So I want to show like timelines where you can see like, you know, bigger bubbles for like points in time where more changes came into the file or to the repo or whatever, and, you know, being able to, so you can really quickly jump to different areas of the commits and see like, this may be the most interesting point, and this another one maybe, and you've got like interesting points between little changes, to try to make that a little bit more easy to digest. And then again, on the bringing the powerful tools to, you know, into everyone is one of the things that I really want to work on. Is Git has a powerful feature of work trees. Mm-hmm. And those are, again, a hard to use tool, but they're extremely valuable. I mean, I don't use them daily or really hardly at all because they're so obtuse to use, but their value could be really important. You know, because you can now take, instead of having one view of your repository on the branch that you're on, you can have multiple and switch seamlessly between them, so that you don't have to like stash all your changes and switch branches. You can actually work on different things simultaneously, which is, you know, something at least lots of developers end up having to do. It's like, oh, I got to put this thing aside to go look at this bug or do something else, and having to always stash or sort of reset what I'm working on here to go do that isn't the best UX. So want to spend time on flushing stuff like that out.
Right on, man. What's something that you wish, or a feature that you wish more people were using or had discovered or talking about inside the product?
I think really the comparisons are really important. So just, you know, being able to, you know, utilize the tools to just see compares between different branches or different points in time. So you can, you know, see here's all the changes, and then be able to boil up. It's like, okay, well, there was 10 commits in those differences, but then here's just the set of files that have all the changes between it. So you can really quickly review any sets of things, and you can kind of, you know, it's it's like, it's like reviewing sort of a pull request, right? You can look at each individual commit on the pull request, or you can look at the set of files in the whole change set. But that pull request is sort of like had to be set up and built at that point in time. Where in GitLens, you can kind of set up these, sort of ad hoc versions of that by just comparing 2 points, and here's the commits between them, and then here's the set of files that have all those changes between them, and being able to compare and change that and see how that affects the product and changes over time. So I think that's a powerful one. There's also I call it the Git command palette. So VSCode has a command palette where you can just open and just execute commands. Well, GitLens has a Git command palette that you can bring up very similarly and execute Git commands. And it provides sort of like a guided experience. If you want to create a branch, well, it's like, okay, you branch, create, and then pick your branch that you want to create it from, put in the name, and there you go, switch. If you want to merge, if you want to rebase, stuff like that. And it gives you sort of like a nice guided tour through those commands to make them happen. And then there's, different options. So like, if you want to do a merge, a squash merge, or a fast forward, those different things are sort of called out with an explanation of what will happen when you do that, and then bring that in. So that's another tool that many people may not know that exists there.
Thanks very much for giving us so much information on GitLens itself. I'm curious if you could share some of the lessons you've learned along the way, working as an extension builder for VS Code. I'm sure a lot of people watching are like, well, I have an idea. How on earth do we even go about that? And sure, there's documentation, but hearing it, from someone who's successfully done it. So yeah, what are some of the lessons you've learned over the years working in the VS Code ecosystem?
So one of the things you just to realize when you get started, and like, when I got started, the VS Code API and what is allowed is very locked down. So it's intentionally locked down to create, to make sure that the APIs are robust and can stand the test of time, as well as don't negatively impact performance or, slow your editor down, those sort of things. So, the VS Code team spends a lot of time ensuring that. Which creates gaps in APIs of what you can do. The extension API has expanded dramatically over from where I started to what you can do now, especially since you can kind of escape the world in sort of like in the views and in your own editors by just hosting web views, and you can then control the UI and the UX for yourself. But I think, some of the things to get started is just to realize that depending on what you want to do, there may be challenges, depending on what you're trying to do, the limitations of the API. So definitely check out if it looks like there's APIs in the areas that you want to do that. I would highly recommend that getting started, because it's never fun to see someone get frustrated at the end. They had the grand vision, they start building this stuff, and then to find out, it just doesn't work that way. But I mean, I think two is just given a smaller API surface area, you can get creative in the ways that you can sort of put these building blocks together to build some really interesting things. So like, the API does have powerful tools for building things. So there's, very interesting things for abstractions, like VS Code's file system abstractions lets you build really rich things. GitLens uses those heavily to, basically build a file abstraction on top of Git. So you can just, you basically saying, hey, go to this URI, which is a structured URI for a particular file in history for GitLens to know, and it goes and uses that whole file system and it lights up. So you can do really interesting things using that to show your own content, even if it's virtualized. Like the github.dev stuff that was recently launched that uses a virtualized file system to talk to GitHub API. So there's a lot of power built into these APIs that let you really kind of envision things. And some of these constraints are also very helpful of what you can do, because they keep things nice and performant and makes you really think about the UX that you're trying to get done. So yeah, I mean, I think getting involved too. There's an extension author Slack community that I run that anyone can join and ask questions there. I think that's a good community to get started with, and there's a lot of examples out there. So I would definitely recommend asking questions, playing with it. I mean, because the API is pretty accessible, and it's very sort of easy to debug and get started. I mean, you can use the Yeoman generator to scaffold out a project for you, gets you going. You can hit F5 and kind of step through and debug and really test things out quite easily. So I would just start diving in and playing around.
And where can folks find that community?
Yeah, so you can go to aka.ms/VSCode-dev-community, and that will bring you to join the Slack group.
We will add a link to that to the video description. So absolutely make it easier on folks. Some last words of wisdom about Git, local development environments, just where you see the industry going. Just your general thoughts on Git here at the end of GitKon.
I kind of, in a lot of ways, view Git kind of like JavaScript, right? It's like this small usable core that a lot of things can be built onto it and repurposed, and maybe the UX or the actual instrumentation of that initial core isn't the best, but you can build a lot on those decent bones and the building blocks there. So I mean, I really see a lot of benefit in how Git works. I mean, there's been a lot of investment of improving the performance for bigger projects and that sort of stuff. But I mean, I think where I want to see the most things is to bring Git to the masses more. I mean, Git is still too hard, even with tools like GitLens. It's still, in my opinion, too hard for. I mean, I haven't honestly spent like one of my main goals wasn't to make Git as easy as possible for beginners. It was more to unlock power for intermediate and more advanced that you don't need to dive for. But I think taking these powerful tools and bringing UI and UX on top of it to rich them, and UI doesn't necessarily need to be like actual visual, right? That could be on the command line, just better ergonomics for how to get at information, how to display it, that sort of stuff. And I think the interplay between the command line and the UIs will also be a very powerful thing. But I think it's the more that we can take sort of like the power of Git, the version history, and sort of like inherently bake that into many more things. Like GitHub is used a lot for just editing Markdown documents, editing blog posts, these sort of things. And sometimes the power of Git is very valuable, but sometimes the ergonomics do still add friction to that. So like smoothing those things out so that you can use it for all kinds of different experiences, whether that's specifically in the software realm or it's in, I've seen, lots of teams now that infrastructure is code in a lot of cases. Mm-hmm. I've heard from a lot of people who love using GitLens to diff between how their infrastructure has changed. Like, these IPs here, or just like what the hardware was at one point, and we had something to roll back, and we can look at the diffs between those and that sort of things. Is sort of like taking the more we have these things that we can sort of compare and sort of make the best options for. So I think, bringing that to everyone, to beginners, to make this a lot smoother transition and to give this, this really powerful tool to more and more people. So I think, I think that's to me where Git will be going, like the Git ecosystem will be going. I mean, I think core Git will stay core Git, of like, just trying to build that out. And I mean, their ergonomics have been getting better with some of the newer commands over time. But I mean, I don't think their focus is, to bring that to like really make Git easy for anyone. But it's a great sort of platform to do that on top of.
Thank you very much for the time, and thank you very much for GitLens. I know a lot of people rely on it. I'm one of them, so thank you so much for giving us in the world an awesome tool. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's great.